Marcus, thanks for doing this.
It's a pleasure to be here.
I really appreciate this.
Oh, my
I
pleasure.
have so many questions, and I'm not going to ask every one of them just yet. We have an event here. I'll ask some of them tonight. But I do want to talk to you about the fact that you have the job of which I am the most envious in the universe. Is it as much fun being a winemaker as one perceives it to be from the outside?
Listen, I love making wine. This will be my 27th vintage coming up, and it's a blend of so many things.
Yes.
Everything starts outside, where we kind of react to Mother Nature, and every year's different. So you have to be on your game, and then then there's the harvest decisions, which is it's an all-season decision when you pick the grapes because you can't put them back
Right.
once you picked them. And then fermenting and trying to bring out those flavors. And what's really great, at least our vineyards at Stag Wine Cellars, at Fay and SLV, is they have a distinct personality.
Right.
You see it in the older wines, and it's my job as the winemaker today to bring those characters that have the personality of our vineyards out into the wines for people to taste today.
I mean, it's fascinating from the dirt to the roots to the entirety of the process, and I have myriad questions about the process. But I want to ask you this because I'm fascinated by the fact that here we are auctioning the library. When you get there, how long have you been there?
Be about 10 years now.
10 years. Your first vintage was what, 2013?
Yep.
So, how does one educate about? Because I assume that there is a taste or there is a perspective that Stag's Leap Wine Cellars is going for, consistent from its inception to 1970 all the way through today. So coming in a decade ago, how does one bring yourself up to speed and sort of figure out where does your personality begin and Stag's Leap's expectations end?
Sure. Well, listen, for one, it takes a winemaker, at least I feel like, 5-6 years to really make that connection with the vineyards, to really understand. Because
how do you do that?
Being outside.
Being with your hands and the feet in the dirt?
Well, experiencing what the weather is like.
Yeah.
Experiencing the different seasons. And as you said, everything that we do, whether it's in the field or in the winery, does affect what happens.
Right.
So you have to see, you have to taste. I mean, really, it's not a rocket science thing, but you need to taste. You need to experience the fermentations and recognize what the flavors are that vineyard wants to give you.
Right.
So for me, when I first started making the wines there, one is to understand the place. And the Stag's Leap District has like a Goldilocks zone for Cabernet Sauvignon. We're surrounded by these rocky outcroppings that get quite warm in the afternoon, and Cabernet Sauvignon needs that warmth to bring out nice ripe flavors. But
Right.
we also are on kind of the southern part of the valley. So that's the cooler side, and the sea breezes kind of hit us early in the afternoon, cooling us back down. And the fog that rolls in at night lingers till like 9:30 or so in the morning. So you have this extended cooling period. And that combination then, I think, is what gives Stag's Leap District wines this sense of soft power. They're complex wines. They have lots of beautiful ripe flavors, but they don't tend to be too over the top.
Right.
And they have beautiful, bright, natural acidity that allows the wines then to be made in a style that is both enjoyable and also very age-worthy.
Is it intimidating coming into a place that obviously has the history that Stag's Leap Wine Cellars has? Obviously, Judgment of Paris is a very specific thing, but certainly it's that thing that defined, at least when it came to Cab, Napa Valley. So is it intimidating sort of being part of that legacy when you come into it?
Well, certainly when I first arrived, it's, don't screw this place up. It has a wonderful history, but the more that I got to know our founder, Warren Wynarski, who today is a grower, still lives on the property, and the more I understood our history, where Stag's Leap Wine Cellars, when it was founded in 1970, was an innovative place. This was kind of in the rebirth of Napa Valley. And when I remember visiting with Warren, and sometimes when I would bring in a new piece of equipment or a new technique, and he's like, whoa, his eyes would get big and like, wow, that's really interesting. And he'd ask 100 questions about it. And that's when I realized that, listen, it is my job today to make the best wines that I possibly can from our vineyards,
Right.
but to bring out that character that is of the vineyards themselves. So Fay and SLV have a different personality, they have different characters. It's my job to maintain that, to make the best quality wine, but also to be true to the place, to express those characteristics. But for sure, winemaking does change. I mean, we constantly are looking for better ways to make better wine on a consistent basis. And the same thing in the field. We're also always looking for better ways to be, more precise with how we farm, and to be able to be flexible, because every vintage is a little bit different.
But how do you avoid letting the trappings of today interfere with the taste of yesterday?
Well, that's an interesting question. I mean, I think it's important to understand when you taste. Let me put it to you this way. So, when you taste the vertical of our wines, right, whether it be Fay or SLV, let's say,
right,
every vintage is going to be a little different. You have warmer vintages, you have cooler vintages, you have riper vintages, you have less ripe vintages. But I think you can pick out those personalities, whether it's the perfumey character of Fay that might have a riper side in a riper year, or a more perfumey side in a cooler year, or the cocoa powder that you get in SLV,
right,
which might, and its power. But as long as you can draw a line through those, then that's what's important. In the wines of today, then I need to make sure that that line is going to be drawn.
Right.
And frankly, it's one of the most interesting parts to me is during fermentation. Only a few days, let's say, after we've picked these grapes, and the fermentation is just starting to roll, right? So there's no wood that's involved. This is just grapes that are starting to ferment.
Right.
You go over to a tank of Fay and you smell it, you taste it, and you're like, dang, you can smell it right there.
Just within days?
Within days of fermentation
Wow.
starting. It's the same thing when you go over to a tank of SLV. You're like, okay, these vineyards this is their character. This is what I need to maintain and maybe even enhance, bring it out more, so that our consumers today, or people that are enjoying our wines, they can experience that for themselves.
Right. Let's talk about this auction, because I assume that was it an easy decision to say, all right, let's auction the library collection, let's auction offerings from this? So they're obviously historic. Certainly the 73 Cabernet is the most historic.
That's pretty cool.
I mean, I don't know how many have been sold since you've been there in the last decade. I can't imagine it's that many.
No, only a few. And listen, a library is it's something it's fun. It's fun to go into the library.
I bet.
Right? You go in and you have these magnums and these other big bottles. But, at some point, and I regularly do taste through the library. It's a really hard part of my job. One of the most fun things to do, because people do buy our wines to collect them, and I want to keep notes. But at some point, our wine is meant to be enjoyed.
Right.
And we will always maintain a library and continue to throw down a library. And certainly, we're not auctioning off the whole library, a small part of it. But you probably, at some point, you don't need 50 cases of a certain wine that's really in its prime now, or not. Something that, right.
I know I do, but that's a whole different personal choice.
Right.
But the 73, so let's talk about that, because obviously that's the thing that brings people, and that's sort of the thing that people easily understand. All right, this is the wine that told Paris, California.
It's a piece of history.
It is a piece of history. It's one of the few opportunities one can have to own a bottle of wine that's in the Smithsonian. It's an incredibly extraordinary opportunity. When you hold a bottle of 73, I don't know about taste. I don't know how many you tasted over the course of your career. Probably a couple.
I've had the opportunity to try it a few times. Yes.
How does it taste? Tell me how it tastes.
Well, I mean, number one, it has when you open the bottle and you first pour it out, right? The bouquet just starts to erupt and kind of fill up the room with this bit of this cedary spice and this more of a tobacco sense that I think that is what SLV's personality is.
Right.
But the most interesting part, and maybe for me, I'm a technician, right? I'm a winemaker.
Sure.
But when you taste SLV, because when you taste SLV 73, it still has this bright freshness and this bright acidity to it. So it's a lovely wine. I usually, the few times that I've had it, and the way I like to enjoy older wines is I open the bottle, right, carefully with the cork, right, and I pour it in the glass and let it kind of open up in the glass and go back and forth to it for the course of an hour or so to kind of see what other flavors might come out, how it develops in the mouth. Usually an hour, by then I've already finished the glass, so that's why it doesn't go any longer than that.
Like how you've just finished a glass in an hour. But I guess when it's that wine, it probably takes a little while longer to drink it.
You want to enjoy it.
But the first time you had it, were you intimidated by it? I assume you had it before. Did you
Well, I
have
was
it before or
incredibly-
after you went to work there?
No. This was after. I was incredibly intimidated
Yeah.
because I had a we were doing it was maybe for the 40th anniversary of the Paris tasting, and Matt Crafton, winemaker at Chateau Montplain, and I were doing a seminar, and a gentleman that was attending the seminar came up to me and he's like, "So, are you going?" There was a dinner that night, and he's like, "Are you going to the dinner?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm going to be at the dinner." He's like, "Okay, so if I have a bottle of 73 in my cellar. If I bring it to the dinner, will you open it for me and you can give it a try?" And I'm like, "Oh yeah, of course." So this dinner though, there was tons of people, and the thing I could think about, this is where I was intimidated. I'm like, "Don't break the cork. Don't break the cork. You have all these people here. That's the one thing that I didn't want to do." So I didn't break the cork, and we all had a little bit to enjoy. It was fun.
But when you open it and when you experience it for the first time, is it because that's a few years after you've been there? So is it give you a benchmark in terms of, all right, this is the thing that I came here knowing that this is sort of the legend of this place? Does it give you a sort of a different understanding of what Stag's Leap Wine Cellars meant to people or means to people?
Well, what it did for Stag's Leap Wine Cellars, and what for me is inspiring is, again, our first wine out the gate. There was a little bit of 1972 that was
there was some 72
that was produced, but the winery was always founded on quality.
Yeah.
Right out of the gate, and that is something that you only have one chance, right? Your first vintage or second vintage,
right?
Wins the Paris tasting and puts Napa Valley on the map, and the huge history that followed that. After that, everybody wanted to work at Stag's Leap Wine Cellars. Everybody wanted to learn what was the secret. What was it that was happening there that produced this great wine?
Right.
And that is, and in the end, the real secret, the real magic, was what was happening out in our viticulture area, out in our vineyards.
Yeah.
And that, to me, today is what is super inspiring. You're to work at a place that has always been about producing quality wine, because that's what I've always strove to do as a winemaker, depending on where I've at, is to produce, world-class wines that inspire people, that people want to talk about, enjoy with their friends, or bring out at a special anniversary or a birthday party for their kid's 21st birthday or something like that.
I will tell you this, as a bourbon drinker who would love to know more about wine and who knows a good red wine from a bad red wine, but that's about it. I had my first bottle of Stag's Leap the other day. I went and bought a bottle, just the $50 bottle of, I guess it would have been the
Artemis.
The Artemis.
Yep.
It was extraordinary. It was
you.
transcendent. And I have to say, I did not expect it to be that. But it's one thing to go from a good wine to a great wine. And when you have your first great wine, you never want to have another good wine again. So,
well, thank you very much. That's I make wine for people to enjoy. So the fact that you enjoyed it,
I thoroughly did. I had people over and we were like, all right, I've written about this. I'm going to talk to Marcus. We're having this auction. I haven't actually experienced it. And it was an experience.
Cool.
Have you made a wine that you thought, all right, this and the 73 are on the same shelf with each other? I assume you have that every day, right?
Oh, I don't know, Robert. I mean, since the 70s, a lot has changed in Napa. The vineyards are different, or
the climate's different.
The cellars are different, and how we ferment things. A lot of the vineyards in the 70s, the grapes, some vineyards were they were planted very much differently, where they're much bigger vines, right?
Yeah.
So a lot more clusters. And so versus today, where the vines have a lot fewer clusters on them, so the grapes didn't get as ripe, let's say, back in the 70s and the 80s. So it's hard to really make like a direct comparison. Like I don't have a bottle of 73.
Right.
Like I'm trying to make this exact same wine. I'm trying to make a better wine.
Well,
that's what I'm trying to do.
So I guess that's really kind of what I'm getting at, because as we talked about a moment ago, technology changes. Temperature changes, temperament changes, and so many other things evolve over that period of time. Is there a certain thing that you realize, wait, that thing was great then, but this is so much better now?
I feel like winemaking is constantly evolving. We're always trying to find better techniques and better ways. And I'll give you an example
Yeah.
with let's say, and why I feel like even the wines that we produce today, I think the wines from the 70s, the 80s, and 90s have aged awesome, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're really fun wines to drink. But I almost feel like our wines today have even more potential for ageability.
Really?
And the reason for that they're twofold. The preciseness in the vineyards in order to promote uniformity, to get the grapes to be perfectly ripe. So when we pick, the grapes are ripe, but not overripe.
Right.
But when I look at even like the techniques that we use, I mean, some things are very simple. You know, in the 70s, the common way of vinifying wine was you would ferment the wine, pretty hot, right, quickly, and then you would sterile filter the wine, and then put the wine in barrels where it would age for maybe a year, and maybe you had some cold storage where you could keep your barrels, or maybe not, and then you bottled the wine. You wanted to bottle the wine before it kind of gotten, too over the top. And a lot of the early wines were bottled. Bottling equipment, bottling technology is very boring, but it matters, right? And so today I look at our wines and I'm like, okay, so we're producing these wines in these cellars, and I keep the wines nice and cool, 50 degrees, freeze all of the guests, but it helps, to kind of capture what I've got. And how we handle the wines today, if we wanted to keep the wine completely away from oxygen every time we rack, we have techniques of doing that today. And at bottling, we have a beautiful filler that, we fill the bottles with nitrogen, right? Then as we're filling the bottle with wine, there's more nitrogen that's coming in. And then there's a vacuum, and it's just perfectly preserved, like exactly what we've got in the tank is what we're going to have in the bottle. And those are things that are all advantages, as much advantages as we can give to the wine until it can head out to our consumers.
See, when I said at the very beginning of this that I think you have one of the greatest jobs in the universe, I love a job that not only makes people happy, I mean, that's clearly what this does, but a job that is where you try to figure out how much of it is art, how much of it is science, because that is really what your job is, right?
It's a blend of farming. Yep. I mean, there is some science to it. There is some microbiology and some chemistry and some stuff, but it's not too crazy. But a lot of it is kind of it's a feel, right? It's kind of an art part where, and a lot of it is also experience. You know what you've done in the past, and then how do you apply it to what you're tasting and what you're seeing now in order to make that wine and make the right decisions to make that wine be as good as it can be.
Well, I am fascinated, and I know you have to start making sure that the bottles are correct for what we're about to have here. But man, I have a million questions. I think you have the greatest job in the universe.
Well, thanks. I love it. I can't imagine doing anything else.
Well, as someone who's experienced your work, I can't thank you enough for that and for this.
Well, thank you.
So thanks.